Welcome to another painting video with me Nagin. Today's inspiration is this beautiful flower which I'm going to paint in a pattern-like composition. I start by creating a simple guide defining how many petals each flower is going to have, which also helps me to create an almost even size for each petal. It's good to think about overlapping the flowers, drawing them in different sizes and from different angles to create a more dynamic painting and more natural look. For painting flowers, I'm using a small round brush and some ultramarine blue, which I water down to make it lighter for my first layer. And as you see, I have a paper towel next to me and dab my brush into it all the time. This helps with the water control because I don't want the brush to be too wet or too dry. And here, while the petal is still wet, I add more pigments to create some shadows and definition. And I make sure to dry each layer with a hairdryer or a heating tool so that the darker and lighter ones don't blend into each other, and so I can create this nice separation for each flower. Now again, painting the flower on top with a much more watered down and lighter blue. Let it dry or speed it up using a hairdryer or heating tool. Then paint the flower behind it in a more darker blue. Now to darken the ultramarine blue, I blend it with some burnt sienna and use it to paint in the spaces in between flowers. This is sort of the layer behind the flowers and don't get that much light, hence is much darker. Time to paint the greens, and I change my water. Using a clean wet brush, I wet the background layer or the white area, then apply some light greens. Now this layer needs to be completely dried before I continue with the rest. And from now on, I'm going to utilize a technique which is called negative painting technique for painting the background layer for the leaves. So instead of painting inside of the shapes, for example, inside of these leaves, I'm going to paint outside. So I add more and more darker layers to the background. This helps creating a sense of depth and also some nice textures. If you want to learn more about this topic, I have other videos where I explain more in depth. After I finish this layer, I let it dry um, with the drawing tool again, and then continued by drawing some new leaves behind the ones I drew last time. And again, using a clean wet brush, I wet the background area, the area outside of the leaves, and apply more green to it. And for each layer I add to the background, I darken the color I'm using or use more pigment of it. Now I'm done with all layers of the leaves in the background. Have let it dry and get back to the first initial layer and add more contrast around the flowers to make them pop even more. Using the same Prussian green, I just go over the areas around the flowers and darken leaves. It's like shadows of flowers being casted on these leaves. At this point, I felt like the Prussian green I was using was a bit too muted. So, to bring in a bit more life, I picked some Hooker's green, which is more vivid and saturated, and applied a light layer of that on some of the leaves to bring in more life and dynamic to the colors. And here I'm experimenting with some casted light, like rays of light being casted on the leaves. Not sure if it turned out as I wished, but certainly was a cool experiment. Um, and adding more shadows and definition to the flowers in some spots. And as the final touch, I'm adding some golden watercolor or metallic watercolor to the painting to make it look more magical and stylized. Those of you who have followed me for some time know that I love adding these kind of details to my paintings and illustrations. And as the final tip, I recommend to heat the masking tape before removing so it doesn't rip off your paper. I hope you have enjoyed watching this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up to support the channel, and see you in the next one.